Growing up in our cozy family home in Portland was the one constant in my life, especially after Dad passed away when I was 12. Mom remarried 3 years later to Frank, a controlling man, who never missed an opportunity to remind me I was just a guest in his house. On my 18th birthday, while I was still reeling from a secret meeting with Dad's lawyer, Frank slapped an envelope on my bedroom desk. Inside was a crude rental agreement demanding $800 monthly. If only he knew whose name was actually on the deed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about family justice. My relationship with my biological father, Thomas, was something special. Every weekend we would head out to the lake for fishing or spend hours in his workshop where he taught me how to build things with my hands. Dad owned a successful construction company that he had built from nothing. He always told me that building something that lasts requires patience, careful planning, and the right materials. One of my favorite memories was when I was 10, and we spent an entire summer building a treehouse in our backyard. Dad would explain every step, showing me how to measure twice and cut once. He would say, "Bradley, remember that anything worth doing takes time. Never rush what matters." Those lessons stuck with me through everything that came after. Dad was not just a builder of structures, but of character too. He taught me to stand up for myself, without trampling others, to speak my mind respectfully, and to always keep my word. These were not just casual conversations, but deliberate lessons he wove into our everyday activities. When I turned 11, Dad started getting tired easily. At first, Mom and I thought it was just overwork. But when he collapsed during one of my baseball games, we learned the devastating truth. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him less than a year. What I did not know then was that Dad immediately began making preparations. Between chemotherapy sessions, he would meet with lawyers and financial advisors. I would sometimes see him at the kitchen table late at night, surrounded by papers, working with an intensity I had never seen before. Dad fought hard, but the cancer fought harder. He passed away just after my 12th birthday. The funeral was a blur of faces and sympathy cards. The only clear memory I have is of Dad's lawyer, Mr. Patterson, handing me a sealed envelope. "Your father wanted you to have this on your 18th birthday, he said. "I will keep it safe until then." After Dad died, Mom fell apart. Jessica Thompson had always been strong and independent, but grief hollowed her out. For months, she would barely get out of bed. I learned to do laundry, cook simple meals, and keep the house running as best as a 12-year-old could. Gradually, she started functioning again. But something had changed. The spark in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fragility that had never been there before. When Mom started dating again 2 years after Dad's death, I was supportive. I wanted her to be happy. She met Frank Donovan at the bank where she worked. He was in middle management at an insurance company across the street and would come in regularly to handle company transactions. Frank seemed nice enough at first. He brought Mom flowers, took her to fancy restaurants, and even tried to connect with me by asking about school and sports. But something about him never felt right. His smile never quite reached his eyes, especially when Mom was not looking. Their courtship was brief. Within 6 months, Frank had proposed, and they were married by the time I turned 14. That was when things started to change. Frank had a background in insurance, always talking about risk assessment and liability. He presented himself as financially savvy, which appealed to Mom, who had always been anxious about money despite Dad's careful provisions. What we did not know then was that Frank's financial expertise was mostly talk. The first red flags appeared soon after the wedding. Frank insisted on rearranging Dad's workshop, claiming it was inefficient. He criticized my interest in woodworking, calling it messy and obsolete. When I tried to continue the projects Dad and I had started, Frank would find reasons why I could not use the tools or would complain about the noise. More concerning was how he gradually began removing Dad's presence from our home. Photographs disappeared, from walls replaced by Frank's family pictures or generic art. Dad's favorite recliner was donated to charity because it did not match the new aesthetic. Mom barely protested, seemingly eager to please her new husband. The changes in our household were dramatic. Frank moved in and immediately began redecorating what he called his home. Rules became stricter for me. I had curfews, chore schedules, and restrictions on having friends over. Mom became increasingly submissive to Frank's decisions, deferring to him on matters she used to handle confidently on her own. As Frank's control grew, I retreated to my bedroom and threw myself into school activities to stay away from home as much as possible. I joined every club and sport I could, partly for college applications, but mostly to avoid Frank's critical gaze. Frank's true colors really showed when it came to money. He constantly complained about household expenses, scrutinizing every grocery receipt and utility bill. When I turned 16, he insisted I get a part-time job at the local hardware store, claiming I needed to contribute to the household. What Mom did not know, and I only discovered by accident, was that Frank had quietly quit his job 6 months after their wedding. I overheard him arguing with someone on the phone about severance terms while Mom was at work. Yet he continued to leave the house each morning with a briefcase, maintaining the illusion of employment. Every year, on my birthday, Mr. Patterson would send me a card with a small gift and a cryptic message. Your father's plans remain secure. I never told Mom or Frank about these communications, sensing they were something to keep private. As I entered my junior year of high school, tensions with Frank escalated. He began criticizing my academic choices, insisting I should focus on business courses instead of the advanced science and math classes I excelled in. Construction and woodworking are dead-end careers, he would say, knowing full well my interest in engineering was inspired by Dad. Our arguments about college became nearly daily occurrences. I wanted to apply to engineering programs at top universities. Frank insisted I attend the local community college and live at home to save money. When I mentioned scholarships, he scoffed. Do not count on handouts that may never come. Frank's intrusions into my personal space became unbearable. He would enter my room without knocking rifle through my belongings, looking for contraband, and monitor my computer usage. When I installed a lock on my bedroom door, he removed it the same day, claiming no doors should be locked in my house. My comings and goings were closely tracked. Frank installed a whiteboard in the kitchen where I had to write down where I was going with whom and my expected return time. If I was even 5 minutes late, I would face an interrogation worthy of a criminal investigation. Mom watched these power struggles with visible distress, but rarely intervened. On the few occasions she tried to defend me, Frank would turn on the charm in front of her, saying, I am just trying to give the boy some structure, something every young man needs. Later, when they thought I could not hear, he would berate her for undermining his authority. Frank's controlling behavior extended to my finances as well. When I started working at the hardware store, he demanded to see my pay stubs and insisted I contribute $300 monthly to household expenses. He would frequently borrow money from my wallet always, with vague promises to pay it back. The surveillance intensified when Frank installed security cameras around the house, including one pointed directly at the front door. For security, he claimed, but the real purpose was monitoring my movements. He even placed one in the garage where Dad's workshop was located, claiming he was worried about tool theft. My use of the family car, which had been Dad's, became another battleground. Frank created a complex system of earning car privileges through chores and academic performance. Even when I fulfilled all requirements, he would find reasons to revoke access, claiming I had missed some microscopic detail of his ever-changing rules. The chore chart became Frank's favorite weapon. Each household task had a monetary value assigned to it, but in reverse. Instead of earning money for completing chores, I would be fined for any task left undone. These fines were deducted from my rent credit, a fictional account Frank had created. Through all this, I struggled with conflicting emotions. Part of me wanted to confront Frank, to stand up for myself as Dad had taught me. But another part worried about Mom. She seemed so dependent on Frank, so afraid of rocking the boat. Would confronting him make her life worse? I chose to pick my battles carefully, biding my time. I found solace in Dad's workshop, the one place Frank rarely entered due to his claimed allergies to sawdust. There I maintained Dad's tools with loving care, keeping everything organized just as he had shown me. Sometimes I would talk to him as if he were there asking for guidance, or simply sharing my frustrations. In a small notebook hidden inside a hollowed-out woodworking book, I kept a journal addressed to Dad. Day 1247. Without you, one entry read. Frank tried to sell your lathe today. I convinced him it was broken and worthless. Sorry for the lie, but I could not let it go. Another page simply contained a countdown calendar to my 18th birthday, each day meticulously crossed off. The annual birthday cards from Mr. Patterson took on greater significance as my 18th birthday approached. The message in my 17th birthday card read, "One more year until your father's wisdom is revealed. Stay strong." It was accompanied by a business card with a handwritten appointment time for 2 weeks before my birthday. I made the appointment without telling anyone, skipping school and taking 3 buses to reach Mr. Patterson's downtown office. The elderly lawyer welcomed me warmly, remarking how much I looked like my father. Then he revealed what Dad had been working on during those late nights after his diagnosis. "Your father knew he would not see you grow up, Mr. Patterson explained, but he wanted to make sure you and your mother would always have security and a home." He slid a folder across his desk. Inside was a deed to our family house, placed in an irrevocable trust that would transfer ownership to me on my 18th birthday. I stared at the documents in shock. "But Frank always talks about it being his house," I said. Mr. Patterson nodded grimly. "Your mother never legally owned the house. Your father placed it in trust for you, with her right to live there guaranteed. She knows this, but perhaps has forgotten or chosen not to remember. Mr. Donovan has been informed multiple times of the trust's existence, but has ignored all communications." There was more. Dad had established a substantial trust fund for my education and future. Frank had no legal access to any of these assets, though he had apparently tried to gain control through some questionable legal maneuvers that Mr. Howard Patterson had blocked. The revelation left me reeling. All this time, Frank's claims of ownership, his control over his house, had been a lie. As I rode the buses home, I formulated a plan. I would wait until my birthday, let Frank make his move, and then respond accordingly. 2 weeks later, on the morning of my 18th birthday, Frank made his move right on cue. While Mom had prepared a special breakfast and given me a heartfelt card, Frank had waited until she left for work. He entered my room without knocking as usual and slapped an envelope on my desk. "Now that you are 18, he said with a smirk, "it is time you learned about the real world. Adults pay their way." Inside the envelope was a crudely typed rental agreement, demanding $800 monthly plus proportional utilities for my continued residence in his property. I kept my expression neutral as I read the document. "I will need time to consider this," I said calmly. Frank's face reddened. "There is nothing to consider. You have 1 week to sign and pay the first month, or you can find somewhere else to live." He stormed out, clearly disappointed by my lack of panic or protest. That evening I tried to speak with Mom privately, but Frank hovered nearby, making it impossible. When I finally caught her alone the next day, her eyes filled with tears at the mention of the rental agreement. "I am so sorry, Bradley," she whispered. "Frank says we need the extra income." I tried to tell him it was too much, but he would not listen. Then, with a glance over her shoulder, she added, "Please do not make things difficult. We cannot afford to lose this house." Her words confirmed my suspicions. Mom had no idea about Dad's arrangements, or if she had been told Frank had convinced her otherwise. Further investigation revealed the extent of Frank's deception. He had intercepted mail from the trust administrators, hidden tax documents showing the trust's payment of property taxes, and led Mom to believe he was making mortgage payments on a house that had been fully paid off years ago. Through conversations with neighbors and some of Mom's friends, I learned about Frank's gambling habit. He had accumulated significant debts at local casinos and with online betting sites. This explained the constant demands for money and his obsession with controlling every penny that came into the household. Mom's fear of standing up to Frank became clearer too. Her friend Susan confided that Mom had once mentioned leaving Frank after discovering credit cards opened in her name, but Frank had threatened to fight for the house, claiming his improvements entitled him to a significant portion of its value. With my birthday past and full legal access to my inheritance, I scheduled another meeting with Mr. Patterson. This time we went through all the documentation thoroughly. The house had been fully paid off before Dad's death. The trust had been faithfully paying the property taxes, though Frank had been intercepting the receipts and claiming he was making these payments himself. I learned that Frank had actually attempted to take out a second mortgage on the house 2 years earlier, forging Mom's signature on the application. The bank had contacted the trust administrators for verification, and the attempt had been shut down. Frank had received a formal cease and desist letter that he had apparently hidden from Mom. Mr. Patterson connected me with a current lawyer specializing in estate disputes, Miss Rivera, who advised me on my rights and options. You have all the legal leverage, she explained. The question is how to handle this with minimal trauma to your mother. Together we created a detailed plan of action. First, I would gather evidence of Frank's financial misconduct. Second, I would prepare all necessary documentation proving my ownership. Finally, we would confront Frank with witnesses present to prevent him from twisting the narrative later. I enlisted help from unexpected quarters. Dad's old business partner, Michael, was outraged when I shared what had been happening. Tom would be turning in his grave, he said grimly. Whatever you need, kid, I am here. His wife, Angela, who had been like an aunt to me, offered to help talk to Mom when the time came. Over the next week, I carefully gathered evidence. I photographed the rental agreement Frank had given me. I found financial documents in his home office showing large gambling losses. I discovered attempts to research home equity loans using our address. I even found correspondence showing he had been married twice before, with similar patterns of financial control. I set up a small recording device in the living room, capturing Frank's verbal tirades about his house and his threats about what would happen if his rules were not followed. I took photos documenting the changes he had made to the house without proper permits, including the removal of a load-bearing wall that Dad would have known was structurally essential. The confrontation came sooner than I had planned. Frank announced a family meeting for Saturday morning to discuss Bradley's future in this household. His smug expression told me all I needed to know about his intentions. This was perfect timing for my countermove. I called Mr. Patterson and Miss Rivera, asking them to arrive 30 minutes after the scheduled meeting time. I also invited Michael and Angela to be present as additional witnesses and support for Mom. Then I prepared a folder with all the relevant documents, making copies for everyone who would be present. Saturday morning arrived, and Frank called Mom and me to the dining room. He had dressed in what he considered his power outfit, a blazer that strained at the buttons and a tie he only wore for what he deemed important occasions. Mom looked nervous, her hands fidgeting with her coffee cup. Frank cleared his throat dramatically. As you know, Bradley is now 18, an adult in the eyes of the law. It is time he understands what that means in terms of responsibilities. He slid a new document across the table, an amended rental agreement that now demanded $1,000 monthly. After careful consideration, he continued pompously, I have decided that the initial terms were too generous. This revised agreement better reflects the current rental market and Bradley's consumption of household resources. Mom gasped. Frank, that is his entire monthly paycheck from the store. Frank waved his hand dismissively. Then he should get a better job or a second one. In my house, adults pay their way. I had remained silent, letting Frank dig himself deeper. Just then, the doorbell rang. That must be the others, I said, calmly rising to answer it. Frank frowned. Others? What others? This is a private family matter. I returned with Mr. Patterson, Miss Rivera, Michael, and Angela. Frank's face darkened with anger. What is the meaning of this? Who are these people? Mom, Frank, I said evenly. These are Mr. Patterson, Dad's lawyer, Miss Rivera, my current legal advisor. And you know Michael and Angela Dad's friends. Frank stood up abruptly. This is my house, and I did not authorize this invasion. You all need to leave immediately. Actually, Frank, I said, opening my folder, this is not your house. It never was. I placed the property deed on the table, along with the trust documents. This house has been owned by a trust established by my father. As of my 18th birthday last week, the house legally belongs to me. The color drained from Frank's face. Mr. Patterson stepped forward, introducing himself formally. I have been the administrator of Thomas Thompson's estate since his passing. Despite multiple notifications sent to this address, you have chosen to ignore the legal reality of this property's ownership. Frank's shock quickly turned to rage. These are forgeries. This is some kind of scam. He turned to Mom. Jessica, these people are trying to steal our home with fake documents, Miss. Rivera calmly placed a certified letter from the county records office on the table. These documents have been verified by the county recorder. The property transfer to Bradley Thompson was officially recorded last week. Furthermore, she added, placing another document down, we have evidence that you attempted to fraudulently obtain a mortgage on this property 2 years ago. Frank lunged for the papers, but Michael stepped between them. Easy there, buddy. These are legal documents. Destroying them would not change the facts. Mom was staring at the papers, recognition slowly dawning on her face. I remember now, she whispered. Thomas did mention something about the house being in trust for Bradley. I was so grief-stricken I must have blocked it out. She looked at Frank accusingly. Did you know about this? Before Frank could respond, I produced the cease and desist letters addressed to him. He knew Mom. He has been intercepting mail from the trust for years. Frank's strategy shifted to intimidation. Jessica, are you going to let your son and these strangers throw us out on the street? After everything I have done for this family, if you side with them, we are finished. Mom flinched, but Angela put a comforting arm around her shoulders. Jessica, honey, no one is throwing you out. This is about protecting what Thomas wanted for you and Bradley. I turned to Frank, meeting his glare with calm determination. I am not asking you to leave immediately. In fact, I am offering you the opportunity to stay, but under my terms. I slid a document across the table. 1. Miss Rivera had helped me prepare. This is a formal rental agreement for you, Frank. $1,000 monthly due on the 1st of each month. Frank spluttered with indignation. You cannot be serious. I am not paying rent to live in my own house. It is not your house, I repeated firmly. It never was. And these are my additional terms. First, you will seek legitimate employment within 30 days. Second, you will repay the money you have taken from Mom's accounts. Third, you will attend financial counseling for your gambling addiction. Frank looked like he might explode. Gambling addiction. How dare you make such accusations? I placed printouts of his online betting accounts on the table. The evidence is quite clear, Frank. You have lost over $40,000 in the past 2 years. Money that should have gone to this household. Mom covered her mouth in shock. Frank, is this true? Frank's defiance crumbled as the full reality of his situation sank in. He slumped into a chair, his face ashen. You have no idea the pressure I have been under, he muttered. You have 24 hours to decide, I said, gathering my documents. Either agree to my terms or find new accommodation. That evening, Frank packed a small suitcase and checked into a motel, saying he needed time to think. With him gone, Mom and I had our first honest conversation in years. She broke down, apologizing repeatedly for not protecting me from Frank's controlling behavior. I was so afraid of being alone, she sobbed. After your father died, I felt so lost. Frank seemed so confident, so capable. By the time I realized who he really was, I felt trapped. I held her hand across the kitchen table. Dad made sure we would never be truly trapped, Mom. He loved us too much for that. Together we went into the attic and found boxes of family photographs and mementos that Frank had banished from the main house. We spent the evening going through them, sharing memories of Dad and the life we had before Frank. "Your father would be so proud of the man you have become," Mom said, brushing away tears. "You handled this exactly as he would have, with planning and patience rather than anger." 3 days later, Frank returned, humbled but not defeated. He agreed to my terms with obvious reluctance. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and we all knew it. He found a job at an office supply store within 2 weeks, a significant step down from his previous management position, but legitimate employment nonetheless. The family dynamics changed dramatically. Mom began standing up to Frank in small ways at first, then with growing confidence. I made sure she had full access to all the trust documents and introduced her to the financial advisor Dad had appointed. For the first time in years, she had her own money that Frank could not access. For my part, I learned valuable lessons about handling conflict. Dad had taught me to stand up for myself, but he had also emphasized the importance of strategy over brute force. By waiting, gathering evidence, and acting decisively when the time was right, I had achieved the best possible outcome without resorting to Frank's level of pettiness and control. I began to appreciate Dad's foresight in a whole new way. He had known he would not be there to protect us physically, so he had created legal and financial protections instead. His love extended beyond his life through careful planning and consideration for our future needs. College plans proceeded with the knowledge that my education was financially secure. I received acceptance letters from several engineering programs, eventually choosing my father's alma mater with its excellent construction management program. The trust would cover all expenses just as Dad had intended. I found myself in the complex position of being both Mom's son and Frank's landlord. It required learning to balance assertiveness with compassion, holding firm boundaries while allowing room for redemption. Frank was not a monster, just a deeply insecure man who had tried to control others instead of facing his own failures. Our family relationships began a slow healing process. Mom and I rebuilt our bond, spending time together on weekends when Frank was at work. We started a renovation project in the backyard, creating a memorial garden for Dad, with a small workshop where I could continue the woodworking projects he had taught me. Frank gradually accepted his proper role in the family. The required therapy sessions, which I had included in my terms, seemed to be making a difference. His attempts to manipulate Mom became less frequent, and he occasionally made genuine efforts to repair some of the damage he had caused. We established new family traditions that honored Dad's memory rather than erasing it. On the anniversary of his death, we would visit his favorite fishing spot and share stories about him. We hung his photographs back on the walls, and I restored his recliner to its place in the living room. Mom found her strength and independence again. She enrolled in evening classes to complete the degree she had abandoned after marrying Frank. She reconnected with old friends and began volunteering at the Cancer Support Center where Dad had received treatment. The most important lesson I took from the whole experience was the power of preparation and foresight. Dad had known he could not fight my battles for me forever, so he had given me the tools and resources to fight them myself when the time came. I also learned about standing up to bullies without becoming one myself. I could have used my newfound power to evict Frank immediately to humiliate him as he had tried to humiliate me. But that would have hurt Mom, and would not have honored Dad's legacy of fairness and integrity. As I prepared for college, I made arrangements for the house. Mom would continue living there with Frank if she chose, but with legal protections in place to ensure she could never be pressured into any financial decisions regarding the property. The trust would continue maintaining the taxes and insurance, providing security for her future. Looking to the future, I knew that whatever career I built, whatever home I eventually created for myself, would be founded on the values Dad had instilled in me. Homes are not just built with lumber and nails, but with love, honesty, and mutual respect. True ownership is not about having your name on a deed, but about creating a space where people feel secure and valued. Dad could not give me a lifetime of father-son conversations, fishing trips, or woodworking lessons, but he gave me something just as valuable, the knowledge that I was loved so much, that he used his final days to ensure my future security. That legacy of love would guide me through whatever challenges life brought next. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you was not who they pretended to be? What would you have done in my situation with Frank? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself and finding strength in difficult situations. Thanks for listening. And remember, sometimes the greatest power comes not from confrontation, but from patience and careful planning. Share this with someone who might need to hear that message today.